The informational meeting will begin in 1 minute. Okay. Okay, we will call the meeting to order. Welcome to the July 3rd informational meeting, and thank you all for joining us. And we are going to start the meeting with a staff report from our city clerk, Tom Greco. Welcome, Tom.
Okay, thank you, Council Vice Chair. Just very briefly, just a reminder that between July 18th and August 6th, there'll be work being done here in Carnegie to upgrade the audio-visual system. So I just wanted to remind you of some information that I sent out the other day regarding some updates to meeting locations. So first off, July 24th, the informational meeting at 4 p.m. I did originally note that it would be in the multipurpose room, but it looks like there may be some work going on in there as well. So we'll do that at the Minnehaha County Commission room. We have that reserved. And then if there is a joint Minnehaha-Sioux Falls meeting, we would just remain there for the 5 p.m. joint meeting. So again, on the 24th, we'll be at the Minnehaha County Commission room. The only item on the agenda right now for the informational meeting is the Finance June monthly update. And then a key item to point out here is that on July 31st at 2:30 p.m., the mayor will give his annual budget message, his address. That will be held at the Orpheum Theater. Having it there, we'll be able to record it, post it to Sire, and ultimately stream it as well once we get it to Sire. So subject to your questions, that's all I have. Just some reminders about locations at the end of the month.
Thank you, Tom. Anybody have any questions? Councilor Neitzer.
Tom, some interest has been expressed in using a timer going forward. Could you just give us an update of what that would entail and what the plans would be during the remodel?
Well, right now we do have a timer that we used. It's operated by the clerk, and the presiding officer, the mayor at the council meetings, is able to view the time. All it would entail and what we had planned on doing when we first started talking about the upgrade is wiring the podium so that we could place the timer up there and just make it accessible to the people providing comment. And the mayor or the presiding officer would also be able to see the time as well.
So all of the times are synced up. What the mayor sees, the citizen sees, vice versa?
Correct. It comes from the same control unit.
Yep. And then from seeing it, it has like a red, yellow, green. So green and then till yellow would mean they have so much time remaining at our choice, like a minute. And then red is time.
Yes, and it also gives the actual time on it.
Okay. Wonderful. Thanks.
Thanks. Anybody else with questions? Okay, if not, we will move on to open discussion. Does anybody have any open discussion? Councilor Staley.
Thank you. Sunday, I was contacted by some citizens with a video from Fort Worth, Texas, and it was on Facebook, dealing with their program to help the homeless. And I indicated that it'd be wonderful if some citizens wanted to bring that forward and present that during public input, because at the 7 o'clock meeting, we can't allow videos until our new ordinance goes into effect 20 days from tonight. And there seemed to be some confusion with citizens thinking that, and this is just for clarification's sake, but as council members, we can't just put anything on the 7 o'clock agenda. It has to be vetted through as either an ordinance or a resolution. So I can't just come up and put a video on at 7 o'clock. However, I can put a video on now at our open discussion time. So I'm going to show this little clip from the Facebook Fort Worth mayor's office, and I have a call-in to the mayor's office in Fort Worth to talk about how this program's working and get a little more detail about the mechanics of it. And I also got an email from our mayor, Paul Tenhagen, that he has seen the video and he's interested in having a discussion about it. So this could be a real neat project. It doesn't hurt to get it started at this level. So I'd like us to look at this. I want everyone to be able to view the video.
They've been very responsible. In fact, maybe a little more responsible than your everyday employee that gets hired, because they feel like there's something that they need to prove, and that's how appreciative they are. This is the first real paying job that most of them had in a very long time. The hiring process is somewhat unique. A lot of the people that are homeless have criminal records that would prohibit them from working for the city of Fort Worth and some other employers. They develop an employment record so that they can apply for jobs with corporations and other local businesses. Once they become homeless, they somewhat lose hope. They lose the connection to services that they need to be productive. It just becomes a cycle of moving from one camp to another and standing in line in a soup kitchen. This is the way to fix a lot of the homeless issues in 2018 and beyond.
And thanks to our city clerk, Tom Greco, for getting that put together. So I'm interested if any of you have any comments or input on this down the road or today. Interested in hearing from you. And then the second thing I wanted to share is tonight we're going to be voting on the public input ordinance changes. And I just wanted to, as a heads up, and being open and transparent and collaborative with my colleagues, I want to tell you I'm going to be proposing an amendment. And this is an amendment that you've already agreed to. I wanted a little more clarification on the issue of showing photographs during public input. I thought that the way it was worded was just a tad bit confusing. So, and we had a consensus, Councilor Neitzer said that, as well as someone else, Councilor Kiley, you said at the meeting last time we met that would be allowed. So what I'm going to be proposing for my amendment is to add to Section E, it says electronic presentations that require audio and or visual equipment shall not be allowed. This provision shall not be construed to restrict electronic or hard copy photos from being presented by the public during a regular meeting. So that's just to tell you that I've got a copy of that here if you'd like. So, Councilor Kiley, you have a question?
Yes. Can you define electronic for us, please?
Electronic would be, in the past, citizens have emailed me photos of their concern. They don't have access to making a hard copy of that, so I have sent those to Jim David, and he's had those loaded up and ready to be shown. So that's what that would mean, and I would hope we would allow people to do that, as opposed to saying you have to go to Walgreens and make a physical copy of the photo to bring in.
Okay. Thank you for sharing. Thanks for sharing that video, too. I saw that last week. I thought it was very interesting. Councilor Kiley.
Thank you. Earlier at the Informational a few weeks ago, I did a presentation on the Veterans Cemetery and a timeline, and today was the date for the first reading. Unfortunately, that's not on for a first reading today because the holiday and some other events have kind of messed with the schedule with getting some key signatures, but we do hope to be bringing that to the council very soon.
Okay. Anybody else?
Yeah.
Councilor Starr.
Well, I was racing Councilor Neitzer to do this, but we were both able to attend the zoo this weekend on Sunday afternoon with thousands of other people. Literally, by the time we were done, it was quite the parking issue by the time we were done that we, well, I'm not telling you where I parked, so I parked a couple of blocks away. It happened to be by a country club, and but it was really nice that a city facility like the zoo opened it up to the public to come and visit for free. They allowed people to come for free from 11 to 1 and saw a remarkable amount of families, people from outside of the community as well as from inside the community. I stopped several different groups and said, when was the last time you were here? And there was an older couple, and they were talking in the 20-plus years since they visited our zoo and couldn't believe the improvements and the things that we've seen, that they were able to see, and what a great experience that they had. But the number of people with young families, I stopped a couple of them, and they had never been to the zoo and never experienced it before. And one of the things that I want to suggest to Elizabeth and her crew at the zoo is that they take a look at what the pavilion does, the Washington Pavilion does, and a free First Friday, or maybe once a season where they're able to open up the facility to people who aren't able to pay for passes and visit on a regular basis, that they get a chance to do that. I think that's been a tremendous program for the Washington Pavilion. I think it's something that the zoo should consider and take a look at as well. So there, I stole it and got there before you did, so thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Starr. Okay, thanks everybody. Our first presentation today will be on accessory dwellings in residential districts by Director Cooper. Welcome, Director.
Thank you. Good afternoon, council members. Mike Cooper with Planning and Development Services. And joining me today, some of our other team members, Jeff Schmidt, Shauna Goldhammer, and Les Kinstead. This presentation started out with a meeting that we were at quite a while ago that included Councilor Staley. It was a chamber committee meeting talking about the 5-year review of Shape Places zoning ordinance and kind of the evaluation of what it's done and what the response has been from the community. And as part of that discussion, Councilor Staley asked about the idea of tiny homes in Sioux Falls, and so that's what led to this presentation that's been delayed a few times. And I've taken the liberty, I guess on 2 occasions, to kind of expand the scope a little bit today to give it maybe a new title called Alternative Housing Options. So let's start out by maybe looking at what's the traditional way of homes getting built in Sioux Falls. And I know Tom was going to be presenting later on the monthly financial report, but year to date, our number of single-family permits is down from the previous couple of years. And what we're hearing from the home builders is that there's a variety of reasons for that. We had a bad spring with bad weather that slowed things down, but a lot of costs are going up for the builders, including lumber, other materials, and they continue to struggle of getting labor of the different trades. So I think there's a variety of reasons why we're seeing maybe a little bit of a lag in terms of single-family permits. The multifamily permits are down just because of the cycle that we expected to go through with the last 2 or 3 years of pretty high numbers of multifamily units. So the first slide is I asked one of our local builders, give me kind of a breakdown of a single-family cost. If I was going to buy a home from you for $275,000, which is kind of the median sales price for new construction right now, give me a breakdown of where those costs go to. And so when you look at the total, about 72% of that goes into the actual building construction. And of that $198,000, 93% of that is for the actual construction of the house and garage, and then 7% is for other charges and fees, including our building permit fee, which is $505. The 16% of the total goes to the lot costs. So in this case, the lot cost was $45,000. 25% of that was the raw land, and then 75% was the improvements of putting in utilities, streets, the normal things that we would require for new construction. And then 12% were other costs, profit, overhead, taxes, and that gets you the total of $275,000, and that's an 1,150 square foot home with a 24-foot by 32-foot garage, and that's the main floor finished square footage. So that's kind of the starting point in terms of what the typical private market would charge for a new home. The second slide kind of goes back to what we do within the city through our neighborhood revitalization program. And again, Les is here today that oversees this. It's been very successful. And when we come back to you later on with our budget presentation, we'll be talking about an initiative that we would like to move forward to expand even more of these new construction projects throughout the city. But the program that we've been using, just as a comparison, we take an old house or an even vacant lot, and we put up a new single-family structure. And so these dwellings will typically average about 1,200 square feet, which is pretty comparable to the previous slide that I showed you. But we're able to sell these for the range of between $165 and $170. And so again, it's based on income guidelines and income limits, but it's a great program that we want to do even more of in the future. And this is really targeted for people at or below 80% of the median family income. And so that's just another comparison of the traditional ways of adding single-family housing. So now let's go back to the original subject that we were asked to talk about, and that's tiny homes or small homes. So this is a movement that's been going on throughout the country for some time, and it really grew out of a trend that the average size home around the country was approaching, in this case, about 1,800 square feet, starting in 1978 and going up to over 2,600 square feet by 2013, despite a decrease in the average family size. Now, these are national averages and national trends. Although there's no specific definition of what a tiny home is, it's generally accepted that it's under 400 square feet is defined as a tiny home. And then a small home would be something in that 400 to 1,000 square foot size. And remember that the previous two slides that I'm showing represent between 1,150 and 1,200 square feet as more of a typical size home that we're seeing to accommodate families. We're not seeing these new homes built for single people or for even couples. It's more for family orientation. So we have a tiny home under 400, and we have a small home between 400 and 1,000 square feet. Within our Sioux Falls residential and zoning codes, we do not limit the size of a dwelling. We do not have a minimum size. We do have a minimum size for interior rooms in a house are 70 square feet and 7 feet in width. That's under our residential building code. Homes are required to have a frost depth foundation, so you can't just bring them in on wheels or a portable type of chassis. They have to be placed on a permanent foundation, and that's because of protection from wind load and other climatic conditions. They are required to meet our National Electrical Code, so our other codes that we enforce would have to be followed. And then within our zoning ordinance, we do have a minimum lot area of 5,000 square feet. and we have minimum yard setbacks of 25 feet in the front and back, and then 5 feet on the sides. So the building codes, the zoning codes would still be in place for smaller units. And here's a graphic showing if you were to put a 450 square foot structure within what we call, or I should say on what we call the DD2 form, which is the detached dwelling suburban, with a minimum of 50-foot lot width for the interior lots, and then meeting those minimum yard requirements in the front and rear and side. This is what that would look like. And we picked 450 square feet just because it's in that, that definition of small and tiny. And then here's the smaller one, which would be more the tiny home that would be on the DD3 form, which is the traditional lots, and those are the 44-foot wide lots. And those are the ones that we would typically find in the older neighborhoods, more the traditional lot sizes. So we don't require a minimum size dwelling, but we do have minimum yard requirements and lot area requirements for single-family homes. So that's kind of the quick summary of options for tiny homes or small homes. So they would be allowed within these particular areas. Another type of housing that's non-traditional is called shotgun homes, and these are more in the southern parts of the U.S. And they're called shotgun homes because they're designed so that when you walk in the front, you can see all the way to the back. And there must be more to the story about what the shotgun relationship is. But these are long, narrow structures, in some cases no more than 12 feet wide. And they just have the rooms stacked up behind each other. We've had some inquiries about that style here in Sioux Falls, but I don't know that we've actually seen a specific example like this constructed. But in this particular case, this example is in that range of 750 square feet. So we're still in that small home definition of less than 1,000 square feet, but we're above the tiny home of 400 square feet. So it's an interesting floor plan that, again, is something that you would see in other parts of the country. So another option that we have within our current codes that I wanted to make sure you were aware of is called accessory dwellings. And one of the things that we didn't get put in the slideshow that I'll add is there was a recent article in the Wall Street Journal last Wednesday on, the headline was "Cities Hope for Big Benefits from Tiny Houses." And as you read through the article, a lot of it was focusing actually on accessory dwellings as an option for cities that are really struggling with the housing demand and limited options for more affordable housing. So I'll scan that article and make sure that that gets put into the information that we're presenting to you today. So an accessory dwelling unit is one, by definition, that's either attached to, or it's attached to a single-family dwelling, or it's located on the same lot as a single-family dwelling. And it can have a separate address and entrance, or independent means of access. So in this case, you have a traditional single-family home with a garage, and then in the back is a detached, separate building that's the accessory dwelling unit. So our standards, our ordinances currently do allow these to be placed in residential areas. With our Shaped Places ordinance, these are allowed in the DD or detached dwelling single-family forms. We do have some standards that would have to be followed. Only one additional dwelling unit is allowed per property, and at least one of the units would have to be owner-occupied. So you could not put up an accessory dwelling and then rent out both the principal dwelling and the accessory dwelling. At least one of those two would have to be owner-occupied. And I think some of the older verbiage that we used to call these were granny flats, and some of the names that have gone on that these have been called over the years. There would be an additional off-street parking requirement, because now you're basically having 2 single-family units instead of just one. And the detached accessory dwelling unit, if it's detached, would have some additional standards. It cannot occupy more than 40% of the principal building, which not including the garage. It's only allowed in the rear yard unless there's a conditional use permit granted. It must be at least 10 feet from the main dwelling, which is more of a fire code requirement. And it must maintain the same required yards as the main or principal building, with the exception of the rear yard. So, again, I'm showing this to you today because this is something that we have allowed for some time. And I'm actually including an example of one that recently was constructed. This is in the Riverview Heights development, which is over north of the VA hospital area. So in this case, we have an existing single-family home, and a detached accessory building was added on that same lot. And this was a 750 square foot total structure, including garage space. And of that, 500 square feet is living area. So that's kind of in that between tiny home and small home definition. And this is a 2-level accessory dwelling. So there's an example of an actual project within our community. And then I wanted to also just touch on manufactured housing, because again, this is kind of an alternative to the standard stick-built options. We've had manufactured housing in Sioux Falls for decades, and we do have a definition and we have standards for those type of units that are fabricated and then brought in from an assembly line production. And within our zoning district, we have a special form, the DD6 form, that specifies the requirements for the newer manufactured units with the setback requirements and lot area standards. And so this is what we've had in place for quite some time as an option for housing within Sioux Falls. And I thought what would be of interest to you as part of this presentation today is that we license manufactured housing parks within the city limits through our zoning enforcement process. And we have a total of 27 licensed parks currently. And of those, there's a total number of spaces of 3,452. Those are the number of spaces identified within those licensed parks. And based on the most current update, the number of occupied spaces is about 85%. So right now there's about 15% of the total number of spaces that are vacant that could accommodate manufactured home units. And so I think that's important to also kind of make sure that you're aware of that and keep that into the equation of the different types of housing opportunities that we currently have within the city limits of Sioux Falls. And again, I'm just showing you this image because this is back to more that traditional neighborhood revitalization program that we had, which I think, again, has been very, very successful, and I think provides a really good example of what we can do and what we can do more of in the future. And then I'll just kind of end with one editorial comment about the tiny homes and the small homes, because I want to make sure you have a chance to ask questions of myself and the rest of the team here. But I think the jury might still be out on the success of those. You know, again, the trend that we've seen for those are in larger metropolitan areas where there's a real housing crunch. And I don't know how long some of those have been occupied, but I think we would want to take a hard look at a little more background of what the success has been of those, what the turnover has been, as part of our due diligence to see what we think would be a direction going forward. But the point is that there is an avenue for a variety of housing concepts to be constructed within the city limits of Sioux Falls. So I think we have 15 minutes, so I'll stop there and see if the council has any questions or other comments.
Thanks, Director Cooper. Councilor Neitzer.
There we go. Thank you very much. It was very interesting. Accessory dwelling units, the slide that you have there. The unit must maintain the same required yards as the main or principal building. Did you say that that does not include the rear yard?
Yeah, they're only allowed in the rear yard, so
could it be as close as 2 feet from the rear property line or something, or what's the rule on that one?
Yes.
Okay, all right. The unit must, did have another one here. For accessory dwellings or even just a main dwelling, if you do slab on grade, is there any sort of storm requirement that there has to be a safe area or anything, or is it just
no, we don't
get
have
in the
that.
bathtub? I mean,
Right.
Okay, all right.
A lot of the times they'll have a crawl space, but there's not a requirement for a shelter area.
As far as access for an accessory dwelling unit, well, and it did say you have to meet the parking standards, so I take it if the accessory dwelling unit, let's say, has another bedroom, you therefore have one more required space you got to provide on the property,
Yep.
I take it?
Right, so you'd have to expand the parking on your property.
Now, it talked about
Like for a single family, you'd need one parking spot.
yeah.
If you have an accessory dwelling for another family, there'd be 2 parking spaces.
Yeah, and that can get a little interesting because obviously the legal parking space couldn't be in front of the main garage. You'd have to have room on the side or something. But when it says a separate address and entrance or an independent means of access, I take it, and we're talking access in the normal, a driveway curb cut, for example, maybe off of the rear yard that led to this house, or...
Yep. It opens the option that if you have a large enough property, you could have a separate driveway.
Okay, then that would be legal, or do you always have to provide an independent means of access, or not necessarily?
Not necessarily always.
So, I mean, in this configuration, would this be allowed if you, let's say, had a little parking pad to the right of the main garage and driveway, and they could just park their car in there and then just walk through, on a little to the backyard?
Yeah, I think some of those scenarios would be a possibility.
That
There's a
would be
lot of what-ifs in there, and of course, we would look at each one. And then there is another provision through the conditional use process that some of the specifics could be looked at.
And I did see that too. Does that mean somebody could, through a conditional use, put one in the side yard to the front yard or something?
Yeah, not the front yard, but the side yard.
Not the front yard?
Yeah.
Okay.
The front yard would have to be maintained as that front yard setback.
Okay. That's all for now. Thanks.
Councilor Sale.
You cautioned that we might want to give it a little time before we jump onto the tiny house bandwagon. I'm unfamiliar with the housing cycles. How long would you say that we might have to be cautioned before we actually know what's going to happen there?
Well, I think maybe to phrase it better is that the city, as I said, the city ordinances do allow those now. We have not been approached by, let's say, a developer or a party that would like to do a number of these tiny homes or small homes. And so I think that's why I'm saying maybe the jury is still out on, is the community ready for that? And I know Councilor Staley has been approached by some people that have been asking about tiny homes. So as the city, we're not out promoting it, but we are saying that, there's our provisions that in certain cases it could be done in Sioux Falls.
Well, certainly at 200 plus a square foot, it's going to be 400.
tiny.
It's expensive,
Yep.
expensive space.
Yep.
Thank you.
Yep.
Councilor Staley.
Well, I guess I was really spurred on to this issue when we went to Pittsburgh 2 years ago, and we heard the mayor of, I think, Betsy, was it Hodges? I think she's the mayor of Minneapolis, talking about how they're, in their community, they are promoting these tiny homes, and they're also encouraging people to build apartments above garages and things to bring families together and keep people within the city. So I didn't realize that we were doing that here. So that's a revelation to me that we're even allowing it and or encouraging it. I've got a few things to comment on. First of all, that manufactured home on page 13, I have been through some of those developments, and I think some of them are lovely. And I also think they're more affordable for people to get into. So I would think the footprint needed is a lot smaller than these other housing developments, right?
Which is why I wanted to include that information,
Yes.
just to make everybody aware.
I'm glad
There's some opportunities there.
Yes. So what I wanted to start with is on slide 6.
And we did number the pages, so thank you for doing that.
Thank you. Slides, so but behind, what is this the cement driveway here on the white part?
Yes, the gray part is the street, and then the white bar would be the driveway to the home.
Okay, so let's say you have, that's where they're next to each other, and that was
Yes.
for the tiny home, they can
It
be
was
next
just
to.
it was to show you the requirements for what we call an inside lot and then a corner lot.
So the accessory dwelling wouldn't look like that. That
No,
has to
this-
be in the backyard.
Yeah, this just shows a principal dwelling. An accessory dwelling could go either in back of that or it could be attached.
Attached to the house?
Yep.
Okay, so then I want to go to slide 8.
Okay,
And so we're looking at, I like that little diagram, you got that little yellow house there. Is that on a cement slab? Is that got the frost thing under it?
yes,
So that has the same thing. And then, did I hear you right, that you're saying the parameter around that, it's almost going to be like putting a shed in your backyard? You can have it 2 feet
yeah.
from the property
with-
line.
yeah, but it would meet all the building code requirements. Yep, and then in this case, you would expand that driveway to accommodate 2 parking spaces.
Right, you'd move that over and have like a parking pad,
Yep.
right? That, right now, for some people,
And
is
this,
illegal.
I think this actually is supposed to show a double-wide garage. So there's technically 2 parking spaces in this example that would meet requirements. But yeah, this is the visual that would show an example of a detached accessory dwelling.
So, well, my next question, can you have a manufactured home in your backyard?
No, you can only have manufactured homes within that designated form, which is within a park.
Okay, and
Yes.
they don't make those as tiny homes anyway, probably, right? Okay.
There is a version of tiny homes on wheels, and that would actually be considered more like an RV in our definition.
Which we are not going to allow in Sioux Falls
Right.
right now? Okay.
Yes.
So then, the question would be, how hard would it be? Let's just say that this thing really takes off, and the Argus Leader had an article, it was online yesterday, but they're talking about how they're saying it's getting too hot to even buy a house in Sioux Falls. Did you happen to see that? And that the rental, that there's a higher rising rate of vacancies in rentals, so the rental price is going down, housing market is going up. And so let's just say that this thing catches on, people start saying, yeah, we think this is a good viability. And Councilor Neitzer was kind of talking about this when we're saying, how hard would it be for the city council then to revisit this and say, well, we see people wanting to do this, and we've got a restriction holding them back because of that parking mandate. Would we be able as a council to go back and take that out of the Shape Places
The requirements for
document?
parking?
And say, we're going to tweak that and say, well, maybe we would allow for off-street parking?
That's certainly within your authority. You'd have to look at what impact that would have on the neighborhoods and other areas. But yeah, I mean, obviously the ordinances are adopted by the council and they can be amended by the council.
Okay, thank you.
Councilor Kiley.
So once again, a home behind the main home. You said the setback is Can you repeat that? How many feet?
Okay. This is slide number 9.
Back the lot.
Okay. I'm going to have Shauna make sure that I'm
Okay.
not misleading. The question is, if you build a detached accessory dwelling unit like this, how close can you build it to that rear property line? Is that what you're
Correct.
asking? Okay. There you go.
Greetings.
Introduce yourself.
Shauna Goldhammer, I'm the zoning enforcement manager. And we treat accessory dwelling units in this picture would be treated similar to a shed or a detached garage. You can go as close, as far as zoning goes, 2 feet to that property line from any part of the structure. Now, a lot of them have overhangs, so that overhang is where we would measure the 2 foot from. Under the building code, the closer you get to the property line, the more fire protection you need to provide. So it may be that you have to provide an extra layer of sheetrock for fire protection the closer to the property line on that side of the wall, and no openings, no windows or doors the closer to the property line you get as well for fire protection reasons. But for zoning, you can go as close as 2 feet
Okay.
to the property line.
And the reason I asked that question, so if I wanted to put an addition onto my existing home, not a separate tiny home, how far do I have to be off that back lot line?
So the main building has different setbacks than an accessory building. So the main building, you need a 25-foot front and rear yard and 5 feet on the sides. An accessory building can get closer because it's in the rear yard.
Different standards for different structures.
Correct.
And I do believe that we have dealt
Yeah,
with.
if it's the main building, it has different setbacks than the accessory building.
And it wasn't too long ago that we dealt with a situation in a neighborhood where they were requesting to do that. Okay? Seems. Thank you. That's it.
Councilor Neitzer?
Yeah, just a few follow-ups. Well, first of all, it would seem as far as for this to happen, the biggest thing isn't going to be anybody in government. It's going to be whether there's market demand and they see that there's some margin to it. So I would think that's going to be the push. For the neighborhood revitalization program, as I've kind of traveled around and I've actually been to a few of these homes, they're really pretty incredible what you see happen, what was there before versus what's there now. The more we could do, presumably, the better. What would be holding us back from, rather than doing 15, from doing 30 or doing 40? What holds us back as far as how many we can do?
And I'll have Les come up, but I will just, as he's coming up here, because this is really his deal. I'm just kind of giving you a heads up that when we come in with our budget request for 2019, we are looking at increasing the number of these to 20. But I'll let Les kind of give you a brief explanation of this program. Just introduce yourself.
My name's Les Kinstead. I'm the Affordable Housing Manager. I haven't had a chance to meet some of you yet, but I do know others of you, obviously. So we're going to be, in 2017, we built 9 homes that we sold. 2018, we're going to be hitting 15 as the target. In 2019, we're budgeting to go to 20 homes. What would keep us from doing 30 is all the normal kinds of things. There's economies of scale that come into place. There's additional capital needed for loan funds. There's additional capital needed for acquiring lots. The construction monies flow in and out, so that's less a problem. The biggest problem would focus in the area being money in order to buy lots and acquire bad houses that need to be replaced and clearing them. So it would be that portion that would require more money. Our revolving loan fund, it would require, we have $1.6 million right now in the loan fund, and we keep turning that. If we get, and that's good for about 10 houses, if we get that turning faster and sell more and move them more quickly, we might have to increase that amount. But it's, again, it's a revolving fund. So.
Do we appropriate more money each year so that you can do 15 or 20? How do you get to 15 or 20?
we turn the houses more quickly right now. We have increased the amount of money that we will have for the acquisition of the lots and so on, but we're leaving the revolving fund at the same 1.6 million, and we'll be trying to turn those quicker so that we can replenish that money and go back in again.
Okay. Very good. And then my other questions, I think, go back to the dwellings again. So it would seem to me, and this kind of would tie off of what Councilor Staley was talking about, I could see a couple of the limiting factors in doing something like this would be, you've got to hit those, you've still got to provide the minimum lot widths and all that. So the land could be, you know, let's say you want to do a 400-foot home. Now you got to buy a $30,000, $40,000 piece of land to put it on. So unless you could do a small parcel or something like that. And then, I haven't completely thought it out, but I could see parking standards, you know, like, okay, where am I going to put that extra parking spot? A lot of people don't even have the side yard. There's no way that you could jam in another parking space. And what if you just want your 80-year-old mother-in-law to live in the little house back there? You know, maybe if it's just one more new bedroom, you just let it slide or something. But so I think there's some structural things built in, and we probably haven't hit it because what if we had maybe one of somebody doing something like this, where you may have to revisit it if it really started to catch fire, I guess. But
I mean, it was at one time under the old zoning ordinance, you had to have a 50-foot wide lot to do anything. Mm-hmm. And now we're respecting those older 44-foot wide lots that are pretty common. And that really helps with the neighborhood revitalization program, because in many cases, those properties that we end up with are those 44-foot wide lots.
Yep, absolutely.
And they like the 1,200 square foot size, because in most cases, those are going to be purchased by families. But yeah, I think the lot size, some of those other standards would be, you know, open for further discussion if we saw that there was going to be more of a demand.
And I think that'd be probably driven by the market. If somebody came in and said, there's no way we can make it work, but here's the design, we could maybe look at that point. Maybe the last thing is the residential building and zoning codes. Do we have any idea whether, if you just go by, I mean, I think you just go buy these tiny homes and they're just pre-built and they probably drive them up and drop them on a foundation, whether they actually meet these requirements?
I think it depends on where they're constructed, and different parts of the country probably have different standards.
Okay.
But,
all right. Fair enough. Thanks.
So again, that's why it would require a little more research to find out how they're built and where they're built and what those requirements are.
Maybe the last thing, obviously home prices are soaring here, but you know, out on the West Coast, I was just reading an article that I think the median in some areas is pushing over $1 million now. So I could see why they're looking for anything possible, and maybe we're not quite there yet, but you know.
And that's why the pressure is really on the larger metro areas that are seeing outrageous home prices.
Okay. Any other questions, Councilor Staley?
Just one more clarification. So tiny houses under 400 square feet, small homes 400 to 1,000, and then accessory dwellings, what would that be?
There's no size of those. It's just whatever you want to do, as long as it doesn't exceed the total. Let me flip to that one. Whoops, let me go back here. Okay, I'm going to head in the right direction. Excuse me a second. Okay. It just cannot be more than 40% of the size of the main building. So if you have a 1,200 square foot house, your accessory dwelling cannot be more than 40% of that size. That's the only requirement that we have.
So you could say a tiny house, when we're talking about the tiny house, small house, they're all that same setback, everything is the same. Yep. It's just kind of talking about the size of it.
And actually, if you look at some of the different articles about communities, they define accessory dwelling units as small homes and tiny homes. They include this in that category.
And would it be, you know, we're talking about what kind of a demand there's going to be. Is there some way we will know? Let's say a lot of people see this and they hear about it. They want to come in and do it. They come to you and you say no. Well, no, because they don't have the parking area or whatever, there might be something holding them back. How are we going to know that there's a volume of interest? Is that something you could maybe tell us?
That information. Yeah, I mean, if we get contacted as a result of this by either council members or other folks within the community, I mean, we'll sit down and take a look at it and we'll talk about it some more.
Thank you.
Yeah. Interesting subject.
Yeah, tiny homes is a very interesting subject. I've sold homes for a while, and I haven't known a lot about them. Obviously, I haven't sold any yet, but my youngest daughter is absolutely obsessed, so I'm learning more every day because she's already declared that it doesn't matter what her job is or where she moves, her first house is a tiny home. So if I'm successful in the interview process, I might help her someday. Okay. Did I see correctly on the average square footage of homes, is that a national number? Was it like 2,600 feet is the average square footage for an American?
Yeah, that was from a national standard that we got off a tiny home website that talked about between 1978 and 2013. That was a national trend that we saw, the increase in the size of single-family homes.
Wow, okay. That's
and I think Sioux Falls would be below that average, but that was kind of a national trend.
Right. Yeah, I would have guessed more around 2021, somewhere in there. And then had one other question, but I think maybe Councilor Staley had asked this, but are those accessory dwelling units, so those units in the back, they too have to have a frost deep foundation?
Yes.
They have to have the same type setup as a regular house?
Okay.
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't know if did you answer?
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought I said yes.
I thought you were looking it up.
I'm just
staring
into the sky here, so.
All right.
I'm dreaming about the next fireworks. I don't know what I'm dreaming about, but okay. Sorry about that.
Well, thank you. Thanks for the presentation.
Okay,
Appreciate
thank you. And again, we will let you know if there's any follow-up interest that we hear about.
Okay, great.
Thank you. And thanks to the rest of the team.
Well, next we'll hear from Assistant Director of Finance, Tom Huber. We'll have our May financial report. Welcome, Tom.
Good afternoon. It's always tough to follow Mike with all his pictures and graphs and maps, and so this time we took pictures of the numbers to put them up on the slides to at least compete a little bit. So back up here as well, Tim Conda is here with our office. He does a lot, does most of the work with the operating budget and also a lot with the financials and the financial system. So I thought we'd take a little bit of a different track this time around rather than following the same format. We've got several new counselors with us, and we have, and I thought it was a good opportunity to just kind of go back and maybe review the report a little bit, what's in the report. Do not plan to cover it all, so I have more slides in the deck than we plan to use. Thought we'd just cover the sales, the general fund and the sales and use tax fund today, but at least kind of just go through what's in this report. There's a lot of information in these pages, and we want to make sure that it's communicative and useful. And so always looking for ideas. How could we make this report more meaningful, in a format that gets the numbers to you and makes it as exciting as you can make the numbers. So I'm open to answer questions as we go, since we'll be going through a few pages. And I think you all have reports in front of you as well. So we'll get started. First page, we always put a quick introduction in the report to give you kind of an overview. This time we kind of put a general and sales tax fund overview page just to kind of give you some ideas as to what's going on with the budget to this point in these two funds. Also go through a few of the economic factors on this page that kind of drive our sales tax revenue, our property tax revenue, things that are driving factors in our economy. The unemployment rate continues to run low. The building permits continue to be strong. As Mike said, they backed off a little bit on the residential side. Commercial has made up some of that, but not quite as high as last year, but ahead of are not quite as high as the 2 years ago, but slightly ahead of last year at this time. So a little more on the sales tax. That's really what we focus on for our economy and drives a big share of our budget and how we fund city government services that are so vital to our community. You can see that although the growth is still rather tepid, we have seen at least some improvement in the rolling growth rate over the last several months. Basically starting in September of last year, we started to see a little bit of a pickup. And we're going to go through this in more detail at the fiscal committee as to kind of what our projections look like for sales tax and kind of a little more of a historical context. But we are at least pleased to see that we are improving some. Certainly not back to the rates of the late 90s and the early 2000s before we started to trail away, in the mid 2000s after the recession. A little bit, next page, we kind of go through a big picture analysis just to give you an idea of how, revenues and expenditures are tracking to budget. You can see on there, again, the general fund is our primary operating account where we fund most public services, police and fire, parks and recreation. A lot of the operating services, planning and building services, general government pays a lot of salaries for people to put those services on the street. On the general fund side of it, you can see that on the revenue, we are just slightly ahead of prior years at this point, or last year. And if you look down at the bottom, we put these kind of in a graphical representation and look year over year. And you can see that in February and in May, we are higher than we had been in the previous year. And if you look to the right, you can see why that is, and it's sales tax and property tax driven. Some of the property tax is likely prepayments coming through from last year to this year, people getting ahead of it. And sales tax, again, we've seen a pickup in growth and trending well to our budget. On the expenditure side, if you look towards the bottom, you notice in the graphic, again, both of these are trending very favorably to where our expectations were, but you'll notice that on the bottom graphics that it spiked up in February and April, and it's hard to admit it now when you look at the weather outside, but the early part of this year was pretty brutal for snow, and we're going to talk about that in a second here about the impact on the snow removal budget. So it does just give you some context because you can look over, you see the spike up in those months, and then you look over and you see the major areas and you see highways and streets that spiked up. Well, that was the snow removal. So to the detail pages, again, we took a picture of a bunch of numbers here, but just to give you a little context of what it looks like for anybody watching. This probably puts the general fund into a complete perspective of all the things that we watch with our primary operating account, like any business would. Now we're looking at our reserves to policy target, the 25% policy target, and you can see the budget there, has us coming in higher than that. That will probably be brought down a little bit. We'll talk about a snow supplement in here a little bit, but we added to fund balance last year, and so. The snow giveth and the snow can taketh away. The cash position, we break down what our cash position is compared to previous years. And again, we have a policy target of 11% on our cash position, but if we maintain our reserve position, cash position shouldn't be an issue. We break down the revenues and expenditures, budgets to actuals, and here's what we'll take a quick look at some of the details. We put kind of a 3-year trend on there so you can see the percentages on those pages so you can see whether we're favorable to previous years or not in accordance to our budget. And some of the things that will jump out to you will be the lodging tax. Looks like it's way down. Well, there was a hiccup and some entities were misreporting entertainment tax as lodging tax. And so that had gone on for some time. And I can talk about a little bit more when we get to where we show the audits on the tax collections, but so that had to be reversed by the state. It was really owed to the entertainment tax fund, so there was an audit adjustment. And so over time, we're going to erode some of that lodging tax in the report. The bank franchise tax, again, that's one of those sources that is a little bit very unpredictable for us as to how bank income is coming in and the type of tax they're going to be paying in given years. Last 2 years, we've been fortunate. We've been well above budget for the bank franchise tax. And the last thing you would probably note on there for major percentage of differentials would be investment revenues. Rates have gone up, but we have to mark to market. This is all our short-term, very secure investments, 5 years and less on treasury notes or bank deposits. And so as rates have gone up, the price of those goes down. We hold to maturity, so we're still going to earn our yield, but our books have to reflect the market value. Noteworthy on the expenditure side, if you go down the page, you'll notice that just kind of one expenditure is out of line when you look at the others, and that is the highways and streets. And like I say, given the weather outside today, you don't think a lot about what it was like earlier this spring, but we've already experienced a full year's worth, more than a full year's worth of snow and ice, and we're just through the first half of the year. So a normal year, and we wrote this in the report, is 44 inches, about 44 inches of snow and 15 to 17 ice events that we budget for. And this year already, just through the first half, 54 inches of snow and 15 de-icing events. So 87% of the snow removal budget is already spent, and that's reflected in that highways and streets number. So we've discussed this, I think, at past meetings. I think Tracy discussed it, that we will be coming forward with a supplement for a snow removal budget later this year once we have once we get through the summer maintenance season and we have a better idea of how the overall highways and streets budget sits. But we know we'll be back for a snow supplement. Light snow last year was part of the reason that we turned back such a nice balance into the reserve. So obviously we'll give some of that back. And one of the last pages I'll cover is the sales tax fund. This is again the second penny of sales tax, and there's some other state and federal contributions in here, platting fees, transfers, other contributions, but mainly our capital penny of funding. And you can see that it's used for capital improvements, capital equipment, and debt service. And at the top, you'll notice we outlined the fund balance. This is a little bit different. We don't keep a reserve percentage in the sales tax fund. It's more on a cash basis. And so last year, you'll see that we had $3.2 million remaining at the beginning of 2018 from left over from last year. We used $1.5 million of that to pay down debt when we refinanced the Quality of Life 1 bonds, leaving us with a $1.7 million balance held over from 2017, and that Erica will be discussing some of that at the fiscal committee meeting here in a little bit. We also keep track of a cash balance to provide you kind of where our available cash is, how it's held. A lot of it's held in trust to make debt service payments. Some of it is restricted for specific purposes. And then the bottom part just provides really a big picture of the budget to expenditures side of this budget. It's on a departmental basis. Later on in the report, we break down basically every project and all the equipment into their individual components. And lastly, for this meeting anyway, I'll talk a little bit about sales tax collections. You can see here the 4 different pennies we collect of sales type tax. You have the sales and use tax, the first penny, which is for the general fund. We have the second penny, which is a capital improvement tax. We have the entertainment tax, which is tax on lodging, sale of alcohol, dining out, ticket sales, and that specifically funds some of our entertainment type venues. And then we have the lodging tax, which is collected on overnight stays and remitted. All of that's remitted to the CVB for promoting the city. As I said before, you'll notice here a substantial audit adjustment. The state and the CVB are working out a kind of a schedule for how they'll actually pull back on those cash payments to reflect that audit adjustment, but on this report, we show you the full impact of what that audit was. Basically owed to the entertainment tax and has to come out of the lodging tax. But really being done so not to hurt the short-term cash flow needs of the CVB. I will stop there unless you want me to cover any other things from the other pages. Maybe at another meeting we can follow up on those, but happy to answer any questions.
Thanks, Tom. Questions? Director Neitzer. Counselor, I'm sorry.
Thank you. Thank you for the promotion. On page 5 of the report, there's the different funds that are listed.
Yes.
Can you just explain, let's just take the Event Center Construction Fund.
Okay.
So it shows available cash balance of $1.778 million, but then it shows the current budget is to be in the negative $285,000. So what is the state of that fund right now, and what will it be at the end of the year, and how does it get there?
At the end of the year, we would plan to close this fund, and you would notice on the sales tax fund that there's a estimated amount that would be remaining that would be closed into the sales tax. When you close a bond construction fund, you will have to close it into the debt service fund. So you can't use it for other purposes. You have to use it to make debt service payments with those money, but it frees up other sales tax dollars. So that's accounted for, that estimate is accounted for in the sales tax fund. The reason for the differential there is we're estimating that, we earned interest on some of that money, so we're going to have to close a larger amount than we started with.
Okay, so this is excess money that was in the bank that we were using to build the event center from the bond proceeds, and that money would be taken, put in the second penny, and then used to make a payment on the event center bond.
Money never leaves the bond trust, but yes, essentially it frees up other money. That's correct. And again, they're still working on a few day 2, day 3 items to finish up, but we would expect by the end of the year that the plan is to close that construction fund.
Okay, thank you. The bottom one, the administration building fund,
Yes.
kind of the same question. Actual $5.7 million. The current budget is to draw it down to 180 by the end of the year, and the available current cash balance is a negative almost $1 million, and it says reimbursement from trust. Can you just explain what all that means?
The bond construction funds are held in trust, so we front the initial payments for the building construction from the city pooled cash. And then we submit to the trust for reimbursement to pay for that construction that happened. So we only do that once a month. So every month we will submit and receive a payment back for basically progress payments that have been made on the building. So the available cash is negative because we're counting on getting money back to the city from that trust to reimburse us for payments we've already made.
Will that fund be closed by the end of the year?
No. No.
Will there be like held some amount as a day 2
There
again
will be
for a
day 2
while?
monies in there on that as well as we work through all the kind of the final wrap-ups and any last-minute things that come up on the building. Usually it takes, like the event center, it takes a few years sometimes to close those. Hopefully we might be able to close that one in early 2020, but it takes time to work through all the warranty issues and all the things that you progress through on a building project of that magnitude.
Do we have the final reconciled all-in GMP for that project, or is that still waiting on the park to get finished? And I can't remember if the park was part of that whole deal or if it was funded separately.
Yeah, the park is still under construction. It's part of this.
Because there's usually I
don't know
remember at the event center there was a document that showed the very
kind
final,
of the running totals.
I'll call it the final GMP, let's say, that had everything, with all the adjustments. I'm just curious if we knew what the final cost was.
I'd have to follow up on that.
Okay.
I don't have that off the top of my head or know if it has been final, but should be close if it's not.
Sure. Okay, thanks.
Councilor Starr?
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Assistant Director. I'll get the right terminology out so it makes you sound official. Take me through the misreporting again on the CVB numbers or on the bid tax / lodging tax, however we appropriate that. So the numbers that I'm looking at for January from 18 to 17, those are adjusted numbers, or we're taking that adjustment? So they're down, that tax collection is down considerably to start with.
Right.
And now so basically the number is, the adjustment is 223,000.
Correct.
That the state wants back, if I'm saying it
Well,
correctly, or?
the state wants back to give it back to us. It's our money, but it belongs in the entertainment tax fund, not in the lodging tax.
And so what you're saying is that they're working out a payment schedule
Correct.
with the state, because cash flow wise, they're already down significantly from 17.
Exactly.
And then now they're going to have to figure out how to repay this out of their
Right.
budget, out of their cash flow. And technically it goes back to the state, but then it comes back to the city on the other
Right.
side of it. So that's
So
why we
it's
always
just-
talk about audited and unaudited numbers. And
Usually we don't see ones, if you saw this in the sales tax, one of the sales tax pieces, it wouldn't be such a big deal as a percentage basis. It's not even an overwhelming amount to the entertainment tax, but to the lodging tax, it's a big deal. And, I don't know how many entities, that we don't get any clarity into that as to how many entities this was or how long this went on. But obviously, you're right. You want to be able to reverse this back so as to not to hurt, the cash flow needs of the CVB. And the state's been accommodating to do that. On our books, we will recognize it. It's recognized already as a receivable to the entertainment tax fund. So we'll recognize it straight up. And by the end of the year, our lodging tax will also be squared up. It does throw off the numbers when you're looking at roll rates and some of our graphics. The entertainment tax, it's over the next few months that'll work out, and it's not that significant. But it makes it hard we actually tried to go back in and piece it back into the lodging tax to get a better idea, okay, how is the lodging tax performing? Because you've got to go back a couple of years and redo all the numbers, so.
But this $250,000 basically is going to be, it could be over the last 3 years that it was misreported, or a couple,
believe it could be
depending on
over
when
the
the
last-
audit was done, because normally they're on a tour. If Counselor Erickson was here, she'd give us a lot more detail how the
Right.
Department of Revenue works by the time we're done. But so really, there's no way, it's going to be difficult to piece that back in, isn't it? I mean, there's going to be some assumptions made. So that these are probably closer numbers from 18 and 17 that they're probably pretty true picture of what's going on in the marketplace of lodging tax, though, too, because this would probably go back that full 3 years.
It's going to go back, I would say it may go back further, it goes back further than that.
Interesting.
So, but, yeah, so you, again, from a lodging tax perspective, we're looking at how we can run some pro formas to get a better idea for budgeting the lodging tax. Because it's just not to look at this number, especially when you put in the adjustment, it's just not an accurate reflection.
Perfect. Thank you.
So,
Anybody else? Councilor Neitzer?
One other small one, the Canary Stadium, there's like $53,000 that was at least appropriated, and it shows it's not spent yet. Is that going to be done this year, or is it not going to?
well, the Canary Stadium now is a part of the SMG overall budget, so we do show that there's a budget amount needed on Canary Stadium, and they do track it separately, but it will probably be washed out in the overall events venue budget, that we won't actually make that payment out, because the events center makes money and supports some of the other venues in that overall complex. But from a budget standpoint, we want to show what we expect it to cost us.
Yeah, it's just a little fuzzy, because it seems to me we were doing maybe some concrete repairs and maybe some tuck pointing.
And that's in the capital program side of it, not,
well, that's not what we.
Yeah, that would be reflected in here. So
That's
if
in
there's
the back.
capital
That's what I
things-
was referring to. I was trying to figure out what the. Yeah, if some of that still had to be done, or if it was wiped away and decided
No,
not
there's
to
some
do
of
it.
that still to be done. So there is some, I think if you go back into the capital pages, you would see
Well, there was a
the stadium
stadium
broken
thing.
out.
Just bring it up, I guess.
It's back, it's just under the event center complex, but there is some stadium
Oh,
there's at least
there's-
one stadium project in there.
There's a 13013 Sioux Falls Stadium improvements, $65,992 approved
That would be
budget,
it.
not started. That's what I was referring to.
That's it.
That's it. Okay.
Because that would be paid by the city, and we do the capital improvements to all the venues. out there, so.
And to follow up on Councilor Starr's line of questioning, that's what I was trying to figure out too, looking at the lodging tax when it showed it at face value down 16% year over year.
Yeah, that's.
Is it really down 16% year over year?
Not probably year over year. Again, you'd have to go back and adjust all of 17's numbers for those, take those audit payments back out. So it's probably exaggerated, you know, at least a little bit, if not quite a bit. And until we actually go back and take those out, it's not going to be reflective. So
okay, so it's hard to draw any conclusions from those numbers
from
until
these
you can.
numbers, and that's why we put it down there and put a footnote down there, is that, you know, and at some point we might try to run a pro forma statements as we're going through the budget to at least give you some idea of what we think the actual collections are.
Okay, thanks.
So,
thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Assistant Director Huber. Nice job.
thank you.
Okay, at this time, we'll open it up for our initial area of public input for an informational meeting. So we'd ask anyone who'd like to speak to approach the podium, and if you have anything to speak on today's agenda, you've got up to 5 minutes to speak. So we have no takers. Go ahead. Welcome.
Brett Cruz, Sioux Falls, South Dakota. About the Teresa's, like the homeless in Sioux Falls and the homeless in Texas, and like, why don't they just do what everybody else does, you know, buy that, or not buy it, but get that card from Nanny Sanford or whatever, and just screw some more people over or whatever. I don't know. And they can get a job, get clothes, something, I don't know. And that was like, I heard the Canary Stadium, that wasn't, well, I don't know, however much was gonna be put into it, but it hasn't been started yet, and it's like, I don't know. If we are gonna move the stadium, move it somewhere better than downtown. We don't need downtown. No one's gonna walk there if the Canaries aren't winning, because barely anybody goes to these games now, and they're barely winning. I'm like, whatever. Like, move it to the out of town by Harmadon or something, or out of town to where all the other sports places out there next to the Pentagon. Yeah, you're gonna have that golf thing out there. You might as well put a baseball stadium there or something, you know. And you can have make a big parking lot, whatever. And same with the Harmadon. There's a lot of space out there. I mean, yeah, parking for all those softball fields or baseball fields, and just add a little more parking out there. All right, that's about it.
Thank you.
Yep.
Anybody else? You'll probably live on in Sioux Falls government trivia history as our first public input at the informational meeting, so we've broken that in. Okay, I'll remind everybody we're going to have a fiscal committee meeting. It'll start at approximately 5:25, and with that, we will adjourn our meeting. Thank you.